Could we see a huge trade between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Edmonton Oilers? We'll discuss that possibility. Plus, is the LA Kings GM Rob Blake on the hot seat? Are the Maple Leafs worried about Joseph Woll? He made a return to the ice today, but quickly skedaddled off after a short spell. Plus, the Calgary Flames. Are we going to see a fire sale from them later this season? Plus, we have more injury updates and news from the NHL waiver wire, as well as a big meeting involving junior hockey and the NHL's leadership, including Gary Bettman. All that and more coming up next. Well, welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about here today. We've got more news from the NHL waiver wire. Nothing too significant. Today, the Carolina Hurricanes placed defenseman Joaquin Ryan on waivers. Of course, he hasn't appeared yet. I believe he was dealing with an injury and has to go through waivers in order to be reassigned here. So nothing too crazy or significant on that front. But we do have that on waivers today. Injury updates are starting to pile up here across the NHL, as well as some combination of injuries and players being reassigned. The Minnesota Wild will continue to be without Eriksson Ek and Spurgeon. They're both out. Of course, Eriksson Ek has a broken nose. Spurgeon was dealing with a different lower body injury, so not expected to be long-term on either front, but they will both have to miss at least one more game. In Ottawa today, they reassigned Matt Sogard and Adam Gaudette back down to the American Hockey League. It's not quite clear just yet if this is more of a paper transaction, just to kind of, accrue some extra cap space for the day since they're not playing today or tomorrow. So it could be more of that, or it could be a case of when they play Thursday, they're more optimistic that Ridley Gregg and Linus Ullmark will be ready to return. Neither player's injury is believed to be anything really significant or longer term. They're just letting them make sure they get healed up and rested so that it doesn't become anything more serious. So, of course, they also have Artem Zub that's out. We haven't received any further updates on Zub, but I think it's fair to say he's likely going to miss some time. In Columbus as well, Jordan Harris, of course, who was the main centerpiece going to the Jackets in the Patrick Laine deal earlier in the offseason, will make his debut tonight in Columbus. He was not somebody who cracked the opening night lineup in Columbus, which was a little bit surprising given where things are at, but obviously see how he plays here tonight. The Dallas Stars are going to be without Tyler Seguin. He's out day to day, and Matt Dumba is going to be out for a little bit longer. He's listed as week to week, so probably going to be a couple of weeks there. In Colorado, Devon Toews is listed as day to day. Not quite sure if he's going to be able to play in the next game or not. Matthew Tkachuk is still going to be out. He will miss the game tonight in Columbus. Obviously, the Panthers, are without Barkov and Tkachuk. Barkov was injured with a knee injury there that happened in their road game against the Ottawa Senators, which was the Sens' home opener last week. But Tkachuk has been dealing with an illness. He's been out for a few games now, so I'm not quite sure exactly everything that's going on. But unfortunately, he will miss the game against the Jackets, which I know he was looking forward to because they were going to be honoring his good friend Johnny Gaudreau. Clearly, Johnny Gaudreau will have a lot of different times this year where he's going to be honored, and certainly I believe all players for both teams were going to wear Gaudreau jerseys in warm-up, if I'm not mistaken, so that's a nice gesture as well. I know Johnny's dad has been out, I think at least once, if not twice, the past week, doing morning skates and practice with the Blue Jackets as well, which is also a great gesture there from Dean Evison and the coaching staff. So great to see there. But unfortunately, Matthew Tkachuk will not be a part of the honoring of Gaudreau and will miss the game this evening. In Utah, Sean Durzi, we reported in the last day or so that he was injured and was going to be out for at least a little while. Now Bill Armstrong, the GM of the Utah franchise, is indicating that he's not going to be back anytime soon. It's going to be a longer-term injury, unfortunately. We don't have any more significant details than that, but it is going to be a long-term issue, which that's a big blow. I mean, they spent a lot of time and effort rebuilding that blue line this past offseason. Durzi was already in the organization, but certainly a huge part of it. Got a brand new, fairly long, fairly expensive contract, big upgrade on his last one, and start the season like that, certainly not what he was looking forward to. So, unfortunately for Utah, they will be without Durzi for an extended period of time. Speaking of injuries and some uncertainties, we don't know. Are the Toronto Maple Leafs worried about Joseph Woll? There was a lot of talk online today about the fact that he still hasn't returned. Of course, we know that he basically bailed on the team due to injury right before opening night. and he hasn't really been seen or heard from since. The Leafs are doing okay without him, which is the good news. Stolarz and Hildeby have been holding down the fort and playing well enough for the Leafs to continue to have a chance to win every night, which is what you want to see. I mean, in this case, they're testing their depth, but it's not all bad by any means. But you still want Joseph Woll to be a part of this mix before it gets too deep into the season. You don't want him to be out long term. You've signed him with his contract to be your number one. So you certainly hope to see him take advantage of that and fulfill that role. But at this point, it's the first time he was on the ice was today, but he didn't last long on the ice and quickly left, and it kind of got a big stir around social media that I've seen. Now, tonight on TSN Insider Trading, Chris Johnson said that right now internally, the Leafs are not projecting like it's a major concern, and they're not like super stressed about this. They still don't see this as being a super like long-term issue, that they're confident that he'll be able to start ramping things up here and skating more and doing more, kind of ramping up the practice and everything here in the coming days. So, I can understand why it would create a bit of an uproar on social media, a lot of uncertainty. We haven't heard many updates. All of a sudden he appears and then he leaves. It's like, okay, it makes you think he came out. He was expected to do more, but didn't stick around long. And, well, according to CJ, that wasn't necessarily the case. But at this point, the Leafs are still, I guess, at least pretending they're optimistic, even if they're not. But you have to think at this point that the longer it goes on, they have to have concerns. But at the same time, the longer it goes on, they have Hildeby, they have Stolarz. As long as they're playing well and the team's in decent shape, they're not going to be panicking a whole lot here, not going to really be pressed to really make a big, long-term decision or anything else. So we'll see what happens, but there's certainly a lot of, you could say, uncertainty around Woll that the fan base seems to be concerned about, which is definitely understandable. Of course, there's also going to be a big meeting coming up here soon as well, a huge Canadian junior hockey meeting, which Gary Bettman and Bill Daly will be attending. Of course, they work together closely on a variety of things, but one of the big topics will be the NCAA that we know they're expected to change the eligibility requirements next August, so that once you play in the CHL, that's not going to any longer prohibit you from going to the NCAA after. So obviously, in some cases, players could play a season or two of junior hockey and then go to the NCAA. And at the same time, for players that even want to stick it out in junior, play their 3 or 4 full years. And if things are not working out to go pro, they could go to the NCAA first if they can obviously find a spot. So, it creates a lot of opportunities, but I'm sure at the same time the CHL is going to be concerned over this because, there is potential that they could lose talent earlier than usual. We know they have an agreement with the NHL for how things work there, which is why we see junior players go back until they're not eligible to play junior anymore. If you're a North American player, you have to play in junior hockey if that's where you're from before you can go to the American Hockey League. But players coming over from Europe, they can go to the AHL at age 19. It doesn't matter, but different scenario in that sense. So we'll see what this meeting brings, but certainly going to be a lot of chatter around the changes coming to the NCAA. Now, one option as well we want to take a look at here. One other thing I want to take a look at as well is the Los Angeles Kings. There's some chatter about Rob Blake, and is he on the hot seat? Is just a scenario where we could see a change if the things don't go well this season? And he's certainly in what you call like a lame duck GM. Like, he's in the final year of his contract. It's not real common to see head coaches and general managers kind of play out the season in their final year of their contract. Now, you see it sometimes with players that are going to be pending UFAs. It's not such a big deal for players because sometimes they can bet on themselves and they know that based on their individual performance, they're going to get a new contract and they're going to continue their careers. Whereas, coaches and GMs is completely different. If things don't go great and they don't get a renewal on their contract, they may be completely out of a job, and it could have a major impact on their career, their life, etc. It's a completely different set of circumstances. Now, with Rob Blake, who's been in the GM chair in Los Angeles for an extended period of time, they went through a major rebuild. And to be honest, there's all the drafting that they did. They really don't have that many players from their, all the high picks that they had that really materialized. Quentin Byfield's starting to come into his own, and get Brant Clark, and they're more recent picks. But look at all the other picks that they had well before that are, not necessarily panning out, or they're still in the American Hockey League, or they're playing on the fourth line. Like, look at, like, you got Alex Turcotte, Akil Thomas. They obviously had Kaliev was still technically in the organization. There's lots of these guys. They moved a few guys out as well during trades. Sean Dursey comes to mind. Obviously ended up going to Utah. He came originally from the Leafs organization as well. So Dursey's been moved a couple times now. But the Kings have moved a lot of prospects, or they've had a lot of higher picks not really pan out. They've really gotten further ahead through free agency and trades. Like, look at a lot of these guys they've brought in. Trevor Moore came from trade. Phil Deneau came as a UFA. All their goaltending has been brought in through those types of methods as well. Gavrikov was traded. The list goes on and on. There's not a ton outside of guys like Quentin Byfield and Clark. There's Jordan Spence. There's not a lot there. Kevin Fiala is another one. They brought in Dubois and, of course, had to move him. So, really, it's not been a traditional rebuild by any means, and they've been in the playoffs the past 3 years. They've yet to win a series. You have to think there's good pressure there. Now, on TSN Insider Trading, they were talking about this. I believe it was LeBron that was talking about it, saying that essentially Rob Blake and president of the team, Luc Robitaille, have a terrific relationship, and everybody involved here is very comfortable with him being in the final year. And that the last time that Rob Blake needed a new contract was the same scenario. He started the season without it, and then I think partway through, halfway or something like that, he did and eventually get an extension. Of course, he's still on the job, but you got to wonder how this is going to go. And at this point, I think the LA Kings are going to have a tough time really taking a big step here. But the Western Conference has started very interestingly so far, with the Oilers and the Avalanche, two major powerhouses, having completely cold starts. So, it's still early. It's very premature to predict that we're going to see a completely different way of standings here at the end of the year. But, at the same time, you got to wonder what the future holds for Rob Blake. And I honestly think that there is definitely pressure. And I know based on LeBron's report, it made it sound like it was all pretty hunky-dory and nobody's worried about it. But they've been at it a long time. Do you think there's got to be pressure there to make a change if they don't have a successful season this year and make some progress? And to me, it's only progress if they once again qualify for the playoffs and win at least a round. That's my opinion of it, but we'll see what happens. In Calgary, Pierre LeBrun also talked about the Flames, how he touched base with GM Craig Conroy, and that essentially there's a lot of people thinking we're going to see another fire sale in Calgary this year. Lots of trades, tearing it down even further. But according to what Craig Conroy was telling LeBrun and what he was saying, that he's not expecting that right now. Of course, the Flames have had a great start to the season. Not to say that that's going to be easy to sustain. I don't think it will be. But at this rate, I guess the issue that he was kind of emphasizing here was that many of the veteran players that would be of interest to other teams that, teams are going to come calling about are under contract for multiple years. There's not a whole lot there for pending UFAs. So it's a different scenario than we had last year where, you had, Noah Hannafin and Zadorov and Lindholm, all these guys entering the final year of their contracts. And if they weren't going to re-sign, it made sense to move them. To some degree, though, it sounds like the Flames are trying to get this rebuild on the go here without completely tearing it down bare bones. And Conroy's made it sound like some of these veteran guys are quite comfortable being there, being part of the solution. And we'll see. You got to remember, too, in GM speak, they're never going to come out and completely tell you all their plans because they lose all their leverage. In my opinion, the Calgary Flames will probably decide what to do based on where they're at in the standings. At the same time, I do think that some of these players are... they've made it known that they're comfortable being there, but at the same time, I think some of them would welcome a trade. We've heard kind of comments from guys, especially like Kadri, who's a prime example. Not to say that he wants out. He not by no means have said that, but I think based on what he said before, it sounds like he's fine to stay, but open to going to certain circumstances too. Obviously guys like Rasmus Anderson's probably going to be the guy to get the most attention because he's got the shortest term left of contracts amongst the big guys on the team that are interesting. Maybe Captain Michael Backlund could be of interest as well, or maybe a Blake Coleman, but you get Uyghur, Kadri, Huberdeau still got a lot of money and term left on their deals. Less likely probably for them to go. But in all honesty, I don't know that we're going to see a Flames fire sale, but to say that we're not going to see much of an anything, I think it's probably not really fair or realistic either. And the Flames GM certainly trying to gain leverage by saying, I don't have no intention to trade these guys, right? GMs are always talking to the media, trying to figure out how to create value and get better things for their team. So I'm not completely buying that just yet, but we'll see how the Flames do this year and where things go. Now, as I mentioned off the top, could we see a big trade between the Leafs and the Oilers? There's a deal that a lot of people seem to think makes sense, and one that was discussed in an Athletic article from Oilers writer Alan Mitchell, talking about the slow start and whether or not they, obviously the Oilers haven't won yet. According to the insiders on TSN tonight, they're once again saying internally there's not a lot of pressure, there's not a lot of panic. That at this rate, a trade for a blue liner, which is kind of something being discussed here in this article, it's possible and it could come eventually. But the biggest factor why they're not winning right now is that their top players are not performing to their full highest standards. And that's probably fair to say, but I do think it's fair to say that the blue line could be better too. So the article goes over signing some veteran guys, whether it be a Kevin Shattenkirk or Mark Giordano. Talks about even the possibility of a coaching change. There's been some people within the Oilers, Oilers Nation, or whatever you want to call it, the Oilers fan base, that think that because Stan Bowman's the GM, that one of his first big moves is going to bring in former Blackhawks coach Joel Quenneville. Of course, we know they were both banished from the league for an extended time. They're both reinstated. Obviously, Bowman's working with the Oilers. Quenneville has permission to seek jobs in the NHL as well. But you got to remember, Chris Knobloch's been on that job for such a short span. He, I think, created a lot of a leash year for himself by having an extended, deep playoff run. They were one win away from the Stanley Cup. He was a junior coach for Connor McDavid. Jeff Jackson, of course, has known him a long time and I think has been a big fan of his for a long time, and was excited to get him into the Oilers role when he made the change earlier last year after replacing Jay Woodcroft. So to me, as I understand the Quenneville-Bowman connection, I really don't think it's something we're going to see, though. I really don't. I'd be shocked. I don't think there's any reason for that. Now, could Timothy Liljegren, knowing Toronto, make a lot of sense for a trade? And he absolutely would. There was a point last year where he was playing top 4 minutes for the Leafs and doing pretty well. So, he's 25 years old. He's a right shot D. He could be possibly a really good complementary piece to play with a guy like Darnell Nurse. There is a lot of possibility there. So, essentially, you're looking at guys like Giordano, Shattenkirk, or do you go with a much younger player like Liljegren who could be a fit for a longer term? Clearly, if you look at what the Oilers had in the offseason, the prime target to play with Nurse this year was going to be Broberg. But then the offer sheets happened, and they couldn't match, and it just created a whole set of circumstances that forced them to make other moves. They brought in a bunch of other right shot guys. They traded CC. They signed Josh Brown, brought in Ty Emberson. At this rate, could they admit that they made some mistakes? Josh Brown was a mistake, and I knew that from day one. Trading Cody CC wasn't a complete mistake, but you only do it if you can upgrade, and I'm just not really convinced that they did. That's the problem. Would Liljegren be an upgrade on him, though? It's hard to say. I mean, based on how things went for him in training camp and how things stand with the Leafs, where he's like a number 8 defenseman right now, which is hard to imagine with guys like Timmins and Myers playing ahead of him. But we do feel that Liljegren is very likely going to get traded. We know that he'll welcome a fresh start. We know that he has, Elliot Friedman wasn't sure, but thinks he had permission to speak to teams, which was the Leafs denied. Either way, something's going to happen there eventually, and Edmonton could very well be that'd make a ton of sense for a landing spot. So let me know what you think. Is Timothy Liljegren going to be a part of the solution to help get the Oilers turned around? Does that kind of trade between the Edmonton Oilers and the Toronto Maple Leafs make a lot of sense? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.